So now I will invite Chris Clement, the Scientific Secretary of ICRP, to give an introductory talk.
Ohayou gozaimasu. Good morning. It's a real honor to be back in Fukushima again. As you know, we've had 12 dialogue meetings over the last 4 years, many of which were hosted in Date City, in fact, in this room. And for that, I thank very much Mayor Nishida, Mr. Hanzawa, all of the Date City team for being such kind hosts, and again for this meeting as well. I'm not going to talk about the results from the dialogue. What I'm going to talk about is how things progressed, what a dialogue meeting looks like. I leave it to the rest of the 2 days to talk about details of the dialogue. One reason I want to talk about what a dialogue is like, what a typical dialogue meeting is like, is because this is not a typical dialogue meeting. Although often we have the same seating arrangements, dialogue meetings are really about sharing Japanese experience between many Fukushima, other Japanese participants, and sharing some experience abroad as well. This meeting is more about sharing everything we've learned, all the experiences over the last 4 years as part of the dialogue with a wider audience, which is why you see even more than usual foreign faces in the crowd, which is fantastic. The dialogue initiative came out of some discussions that were held on the margins of the first international expert workshop organized in Fukushima at Fukushima Medical University in September 2011, so 6 months after the accident. Just 2 months later, we had the first dialogue meeting. I'll come to that in just a moment. As a sort of an experiment, born in part out of the experience of Jacques Blanchard in Belarus, with Ethel's project there, and in part from prodding from Junichiro Tada, who we met on the margins of that meeting in September. I think the experiment's gone quite well, actually, in retrospect. I'm very glad it has. At the beginning, we weren't sure how well it would go, but I'm very happy with what's been achieved so far. So we've had 12 main dialogue meetings. When I say main dialogue meeting, I mean a meeting that takes 2 days, involves about 100 people. You might ask, why? Why is ICRP involved in this? There's a number of reasons. We're in a position where we can help transfer some knowledge and experience from communities affected by Chernobyl to people in Fukushima. We are an independent third party, you might say, so we can facilitate discussions between stakeholders, local stakeholders, national stakeholders, international stakeholders. For ICRP, one key reason we were involved is that we took the opportunity to learn a lot from people actually facing difficulties day by day, overcoming difficulties in many cases, not in all cases, during the recovery after the accident in Fukushima. The point is that we can then use that information, use that knowledge, use that experience, and work together with our Japanese colleagues to improve future recommendations for recovery. And in a very subtle way, most of the time, we also share some ICRP recommendations directly with the communities. We don't talk about the detailed scientific and technical jargon we use in ICRP recommendations, but we do talk about some general concepts, in particular those coming from ICRP Publication 111 on recovery. We have not done this alone, far from it. I'm not going to try and read all the names off this list, but there have been very many international, Japanese, foreign organizations involved in the dialogues, all of them playing their own roles. In particular, I'd like to mention Date City because we've been hosted here so many times. I hesitate to mention anyone specifically because I won't speak to them all, but nonetheless, we've had a great opportunity to work with these dozen or more organizations to make this reality. So what is a typical dialogue meeting? As I said, it's 2 days, generally, on a weekend, which means people who have real jobs can come and join us, which is great. Generally, there's around 100 people, driven in part by interest, in part by the size of the room. Today, here we have close to 120, which is basically the limit of the size of the room. We're very happy with the turnout this weekend for the dialogue meeting, for this workshop. Normally of the about 100 people, there are about 30 direct participants in the dialogue. We use common language. We don't talk about derived consideration reference levels. We talk about making good decisions and problems being faced every day. Generally, there are two modes of dialogue, I would say. One is a bit more like you'd see in a regular international meeting, short presentations on what's going on in Fukushima, what's gone on in Belarus, what's going on in Norway, and so on. The more unique feature to these meetings are the structured dialogues, where the 30 direct participants or so, 20 or 30, would each have a minute or two to say what they feel about the topic. Everyone reflects in the room. It goes around again for a second round so the participants can reflect on what they've heard. And through that, we really gain an insight into what's going on in Fukushima and really a deeper understanding of experiences that we're sharing. We've tended to summarize these meetings in a few pages. At first it was summarized in the meeting at the end, which was very difficult. Later it's been summarized after the meeting, more just to have some record of what was discussed. There's always been some media attention. In fact, in the first meeting there was quite a bit, and the level goes up and down. That's great because it's shared throughout a group wider than those here. Also, Ethos in Fukushima, who joined the party on the second dialogue meeting, puts a great effort into showing the results of the meeting through videos, through their website, through constant Twitter. If you look for Ando-san, she's probably tweeting right now. It's fantastic. It's fantastic. And of course, Ando-sensei. They might be tweeting at each other. I don't know how this works. Got you. We do have some summary information on our website as well, but the Ethos in Fukushima website is the definitive place to go if you can read Japanese. So we provide in mostly English on our website. In addition to these 12 main dialogue meetings, we do many other things on what we call dialogue missions. So when we come to Japan, we don't come for 2 days, we come for a weekend. We also have discussions with smaller communities, mostly within Fukushima Prefecture, but we've also been to Miyagi, north of here, and so on. We talk to individuals actively involved in the recovery, so we have one-on-one conversations or small group conversations just to understand what's going on. Some professional groups, some national, prefectural, and local authorities, and NPOs. So we have a broad spectrum of groups that we talk to when we're in Japan as part of what we call the overall dialogue mission or overall dialogue initiative. We've had some exchanges in terms of education and outreach at the professional level as well, and discussions with key individuals on plans for future action. And here what I mean is we rely on local interest in terms of setting the next dialogue meeting. When should it be? What should the topic be? And as I progress through the 12 dialogues, you'll see how we've tried to respond to the needs of the communities and not an agenda set by ICRP or the group of organizations I mentioned before. It's really an agenda set by the people of Fukushima. The first dialogue was held in Fukushima City. It was, as I said, a bit of an experiment. The topic was quite general: rehabilitation after the Fukushima accident, lessons from Chernobyl, and ICRP recommendations. We had speakers from Belarus, Norway, and France, all talking about their experience in post-Chernobyl. We interestingly also had a session on principles of radiological protection. It was the first and last time we talked specifically about details of radiological protection in technical terms. We found that this is not what people really want to hear. People don't want to be trained health physicists. They want to know simple things they can do to manage their daily lives, the lives of their loved ones. The top left picture shows some media. There was certainly media attention, but from my point of view, just as important were people from the media who participated in the dialogue, not just covering it, talking about the difficulties and challenges they had, and still have probably, in communicating things to the general audience. People in the media were in the same position as people everywhere else. They hadn't been confronted with radiation before in their daily lives, so they were facing challenges too. It was great to have them as active participants, not just as distant observers. A key point of these dialogues is what we call radiation protection culture, radiological protection culture, RP culture, which sounds very complicated, but really it's fairly simple. I raise it now because this is a thread through all of the dialogue meetings. And RP culture is just the knowledge, skills, and attitude necessary for people and communities to make informed and effective decisions and to act wisely with regard to exposures to radiation. So it's about knowing a little bit about radiation, knowing a little bit about how to act wisely in the face of it. It's very practical. Sometimes we say practical radiation protection culture. It's about both safety and security. Before I was with ICRP, I was a regulator in Canada, and our mandate, and the mandate of most regulatory authorities, is protection of safety of people and protection of the environment as well. But a strong message that came out many times during the dialogues that safety is not enough. I remember very well someone saying concisely and simply, it's not enough to be safe, we also need to feel secure. So, it's not just enough to make sure that the health risks are acceptably low. It's also important to make sure people feel comfortable and can work and can have a regular life. RP culture is also about sharing experiences, engaging stakeholders, and diffusing practical information that people can use in their daily lives. So back to the dialogues. We had a second dialogue. The second dialogue in February 2012 was actually our first in Date City, not in this hall, but in Date City. It was a start of discussions on food, although the main topic was really what's going on in Date City, achievements so far, obstacles to recovery. We had a presentation from Mayor Nishida here. We again had people from Belarus, France, and Norway talking about post-Chernobyl experiences. And this was the first dialogue where we had a closing remarks by NEA, Ted. This has become a tradition. At each end of each dialogue meeting, Ted gives his view on what we just said for the last 2 days. Always very entertaining and enlightening, I think. The third dialogue, we were back in Date City, but as you can see from the pictures, we were here. A great home for the dialogue. We've been here maybe about half of the dialogue meetings have been in Date City. We wanted to travel around as well in other places in Fukushima, so we've done so. But because of the gracious hospitality of Nishida, we've been here often. The focus of number 3 was food. We still had participation from Norway and France, but not Belarus this time. And in fact, I'm quite sure we've had French and Norwegian participation in every dialogue meeting, if I'm not mistaken. It's been great. It's been great to have the interaction between Japanese participants, but also with some input from the outside. The fourth dialogue, we're back here in Date City. And although there were still many challenges, this is November 2012, so some time had passed since the accident. For me, though, this was the first dialogue meeting where there was a slow move to more looking forward, a bit more positive outlook. Still many difficulties, still many challenges, no question about it. One quote I remember very well from this dialogue meeting was someone saying that it was time to seek moments of joy. So it wasn't all so dark as in the first dialogue meetings where there was a lot of anger and frustration. It was starting to become tempered a bit with positive thoughts as well. Although even in this dialogue meeting there were moments of great difficulty as well. Another quote I remember very well is to not forget the Itate, because these are people that were not having as much success in recovery as others at the time. The fifth dialogue meeting was special in that it was the first time, I would say, a normal person from abroad came to speak to the group. Not an expert in RP, not someone from an authority, but a reindeer herder from Sami people in Norway. He described his experiences in the Sami communities there, dealing with season contamination in their lifestyle, which I think really hit home because it was a direct connection between people living their regular, everyday, normal lives in Norway with people living their everyday, normal lives in Fukushima, shared some experiences. The sixth dialogue had a similar feature. We had a Belarusian speaker come. She is, I would say she's semi-professional. She's certainly professional. She's a dosimetrist. Her job in Belarus is to take measurements of foods and so on in Belarus. But she's also a very everyday person doing everyday things. Anastasia, you see in the top right corner in her translator there, Vitaly. Again, this is another great connection between people doing everyday business in a contaminated area with same people, or people experiencing similar things in Fukushima. The seventh dialogue, it was the first time we moved to the coast, really, in Iwaki. The focus was on self-help actions, and I'll come back to that in just a moment. But of course, when there's a difference between here in Date City and those living on the coast, because they were impacted even more by the larger events surrounding the earthquake, the tsunami in particular. So things are much more complicated, in fact. But this gives me an opportunity to say a few words about self-help protective actions. So again, this is something that we talk about in our recommendations and maybe is a little off-putting if you don't understand what it is. But it's also a pretty simple concept. It's just informed actions taken by inhabitants with regard to the exposures of radiation of themselves, their families, and their communities. So it's people doing sensible things to make sure they and their loved ones are safe. Why is this important? Exposure is largely driven by individual behavior. You can do cleanups, but you can also modify behavior or choose to do things to protect yourselves and your loved ones. Inhabitants have local knowledge that authorities and foreigners simply don't have. And very importantly, this ability to take informed decisions to protect themselves and their loved ones gives people a sense of control, lets them regain some control over their lives. And this is key to building confidence. And I don't mean to dismiss activities undertaken by authorities, or remediation activities. This is also crucial. But self-help protective actions and actions by authorities work together for recovery effectively. Self-help requires a few ingredients to make it work. There has to be a desire to improve conditions. And most people have this desire to improve the conditions where they live. Not all. Some can't face that difficult situation. I fully understand that and choose to move on. But many people have a desire to improve conditions. It needs some information, so they have to know how much radiation and where is it, basically, in the land and foodstuffs and so on. Often people need a little bit of equipment and training. And equipment can be as simple as a small, cheap device that measures radiation around the house or in the playground. It's very empowering for someone to take a device in their hand and take measurements around their house or where they work or where their friends live, to take the invisible and make it visible, sort of a theme that is in Juntakai's photo exhibition here, more about that later. A radiation detection device turns the invisible, maybe not visible, but at least it gives you a sense of the shape of your environment. Some knowledge on how to reduce exposures, and support, because people aren't naturally born understanding radiation, know how to run a meter. A little bit of support to allow these things to happen. The whole point, of course, is improved protection and well-being. So co-expertise, basically just working together, experts and people together cooperatively, leads to radiological protection culture, which leads to self-help protection, and all of that leads to great things like informed, engaged, and supported citizens. Individuals who can actually take effective action to speed the recovery, and what matters most in the long run is improved protection and well-being. And the eighth dialogue we had was also on the coast in Minamisoma City. Even more here, I would say, than in the previous seventh dialogue. There were difficult conversations about having lost family, loved ones, colleagues from the tsunami. A very complex dialogue, really exploring this dimension of a triple disaster, dealing with it all at once. The ninth dialogue, back in Date City, focusing on raising children after the accident. And why this topic? In fact, why all these topics? This topic of raising children came up in every single dialogue meeting before this. We had a dialogue on food. People talk about their children. We have a dialogue on self-help. People talk about their children. This is natural. This is human. Most people care much more for the welfare of their kids than for themselves. Mothers in particular, but fathers as well. We see both. So we felt it was time to respond to that clear desire to focus on the subject of raising children in Fukushima after the accident. The 10th dialogue, back in Date City again, December 2014, so 1 year ago. A very interesting topic, tradition and culture. What does that have to do with science? Well, nothing, of course. This isn't just a scientific undertaking, but it has a lot to do with life and recovery. Two aspects, in fact, emerged. One that says recovery in general is also about recovering tradition and culture. If the shrine that you used in the past is no longer accessible for whatever reason, then you lose something. If the festival you used to hold can no longer be held because people are dispersed outside their homes, then you've lost something. Recovering these traditions and culture helps the overall recovery. And in fact, overall recovery is not complete until tradition and culture is also recovered. Getting close to the end here, the 11th dialogue kind of swung quite a bit in the other direction, from tradition and culture to measurements, something that sounds very scientific, and in fact, it is. We did discuss a few scientific things, but mainly it was about the role of measurement in regaining control. So not so much what exactly does a microsievert mean. In fact, we almost never talk about microsieverts or dose limits or any of these things in these meetings. We talk about more practical, everyday things. So as I said before, the role of measurements in regaining control, a lot to do with people being able to take their own measurements to perhaps trust or not data come from the government or other sources. But when you can check yourself, it gives you control, gives you more confidence. We're talking about measurements with D-shuttles, oximeters that you can wear, measurements of foodstuffs, measurements of areas. And just a note, this was the first time we had a presentation from the US. A fellow from University of California, Berkeley, who's been doing some work in Japan, came to talk about their experience in the role of measurements in regaining control, or in fact in communications in California, because tiny bits of cesium float across the ocean and people in California panic. Completely unnecessarily in my view. But they took measurements to help people understand what that really meant in California. And the 12th dialogue meeting, only a few months ago, September 2015, already we're heading towards this meeting, because this 12th dialogue was a sort of a summing up experience we have gained together. The ICRP chair, Claire Cousins, who normally can't leave her daily clinical practice where she actually saves lives on a daily basis in the operating theater. She came to this meeting to lend her support to the entire undertaking. It was also interesting that we got a first peek at Junsakai's photo exhibition, a small portion of what you're seeing here, and you'll hear more about today in the 12th dialogue. So now, today, here we are at this international workshop. Why? A few reasons. It summarizes, I hope, and marks the end of this large, I would say, multi-stakeholder dialogue initiative led by ICRP. We've had 12 great dialogues. About halfway through, we actually had a strategic discussion to figure out how best to wrap things up, and we thought 12 was quite a good number to cover the major topics. We hope this is good for the people of Fukushima, because it's an opportunity to give an international voice to people who have spoken in this room, and mainly heard within this room and locally. Now they'll be heard more broadly. And will also help the rest of the world, because you can widely share the experience and main lessons from the dialogue missions, from the dialogue meetings, with the rest of the world. To aid this, we will have proceedings, just like a nice scientific conference, although they won't be scientific proceedings. There'll be proceedings of what's discussed at this workshop. They'll be published a few months later. These things take time, but we're working very hard to make them free and open in both English and Japanese. What's next for ICRP? So I said this is the end of the dialogue initiative, but please don't misunderstand me, it's not the end of dialogues with ICRP in Japan. What we believe is important, what we believe in discussion with others in Japan is important, is to pass the baton, shift the leadership of the main dialogue meetings to the local organizations. We will continue to be involved and support throughout. And with that, I thank you very much for your attention.